All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chuck.
Thank you, Wilma, and thanks to all the people who are sort of watching live, and then those of you watching after the fact. I think this is a really, really important topic strategically for my university. So I'm a standards person. You all know me with LTI Ring of Compliance. I don't have Open Badges Ring of Compliance on my shoulder, but I've become lately passionate about badges. So badges as a name and as a word really kind of started about like merit badges, these little small tchotchkes that were just like you did something. You showed up for a weekend STEM workshop and you give a weekend STEM workshop badge. And then they sort of span to credentials and things that are like really impressive and really significant work. So the start of badges was in 2012, and it was a really cool and nifty technology. PNG files, which is one of the many graphic formats like JPEG, etc., has metadata in it. And so what they did is they did what they called baked badges. And it was a PNG, which was then a badge inside of it. So there was metadata inside of an image file that could be shown in a browser. But if you right click and save that badge, you could validate the badge. Now, the way it did it, it was pretty much an MD5 on the person's email. So you had to say, did drchuck@gmail.com earn this badge? And that was called badge validation. As badges got more serious, this little bit of data, there was no there was no revocation. This little bit of data was just not enough. So the whole thing in 2018 went to badges 2. So IMS took over badges 1 from Mozilla and did OBI 1. And then OBI 2 was something they started working on right away. That was a much more data, like what does this reflect, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a brand new badge standard called OBI 3.2 that is now aligned with the W3C verifiable credentials. And by the way, I'm experimenting with how to give a lecture in the age of AI. And so if you want more on any slide, I've given you the prompt that mostly gave me this slide. Give me a brief history of open badges from the original work in Mozilla through IMS, N1 EdTech, and OB3. And it will give you most of what I just said. So just to give you a sense of how silly badges were when they first started out, in 2013, Coursera introduced badges. Pam Fox, a friend of mine, she found this thing called Badgeville, which is a JavaScript thing that layered on top of a website, and she added badges, and they did research. There's a paper on like how these badges work. There's community member, that's a welcome. There's an early bird, which is an earthworm. There's a forum newbie and a bronze reader and a supporter, and you would get different colors of badges, but like the early bird badge would always have a worm on it. And so this shows you that badges were this kind of like, we don't exactly know what the purpose of these things are. And we think that just people will want to collect them and have like a big wall of badges, right? Now, what happened also in 2012, also in Coursera, is that Coursera started selling in effect LinkedIn credentials, anywhere from, 500 to 2,000, $3,000. And by the way, the numbers I'm about to show you are not proprietary information. I asked Coursera about how much money University of Michigan has made from Coursera between 2012 and present, do not include online degrees. And so there's degree stuff, there's other things. And so here's the graph. So in 2012, I asked it, can you track the relative revenue share of Coursera courses over time that are from academic institutions versus commercial organizations like Google, Facebook, Deep Learning? Ignore any degree programs. So when Coursera first started out, it was 97% academic. And we got a bunch of money. We helped Coursera build a brand, et cetera. But then Coursera realized that there was a lot of money to be made selling Google, Facebook, deep learning certificates, highly commercial things that people thought that would give them jobs. And that trend is growing to the point where academic institutions like Michigan are less than 25% of Coursera's revenue mix. So we're not nearly as strategic to them these days as Google is. And we're not growing in terms of strategicness. So one of the thoughts we've had for a few years at University of Michigan is maybe we should get ready to host our own courses and create our own branded badges for students to put into LinkedIn. We made a lot of money, and there appears to be a market. And it turns out that writing this code turns out to be a lot easier. So you can ask, what is the best practice for a learning system to mint a credential or badge and link it into a LinkedIn profile? Well, learner does something in the learning system. You mint a credential with a bunch of stuff, some skills, etc. And you create a page, a durable verification page, and that page is really a network of exposed metadata. And I'll show you some of that in a bit. You offer an add to LinkedIn, and then you got to keep the issuer and those URLs consistent. The problem is these URLs are not throwaway. People might put them in their LinkedIn profiles for years and years and years. The credential entry stays. If someone wants to validate it and they click on it because you broke it, they get a 404. And so if the University of Michigan bachelor's degree credential that you put in your LinkedIn profile has a 404 not found, well, like, wait a second, University of Michigan, what happened to that? My bachelor's degree is a 404. You can ask, what does LinkedIn do if the durable public verification page goes or changes ever so slightly? And it says, make the credential URLs permanent, stable domain, no session, no redirects, no URLs, no course semester, no internal databases, nothing. For serious credentials, the URL should outlive the learning platform implementation. And of course, the commercial bad market, in a word, sucks because they violate every single one of those rules. So a company like Parchment or Badger gets bought by Canvas, and then Canvas uses your badges to lock you into Canvas. Pearson would say, well, don't use Canvas, use Credly. Now you're paying Pearson. Or Credible. Now Moodle makes the mistake of being a built-in. So that means that if you issue a badge in LinkedIn in Moodle and you change Moodle or Moodle changes whatever, and there's little companies that call themselves like Open Badge Factory, which are not open source, right? Every one of these are permanent, closed source, proprietary, and you're putting your permanent verification, they're putting their verification URLs in your branded LinkedIn certificates. Not good. So we've been exploring at University of Michigan awarding our own credentials and how we will put those in people's LinkedIn profiles. So I have this course called Computer Architecture for Everybody, and I'm going to be selling it sometime this summer. And I said, can I give people LinkedIn badges? And they said, you're in Canvas, you'll use Parchment, right? We got to pay $4 for a badge. And I'm like, huh? And then I said, can you create a picture of Dr. Chuck with steam coming out of his ears after he was told to use Parchment as a badging system for my University of Michigan non-credit courses? So with AI, I asked Insugi, I said, could I add badges? And it was like, sure. It took 6 hours. And literally, if you go to ai.drchuck.com, you can watch me in my office coding, confused, lost, etc. It took about 6 hours of work over 2 days. That's how easy it was. Can you find YouTube videos where Dr. Chuck added open badges to Sugi? So then I was so happy. And so I came to a Sakai core meeting and I said, Wilma, let me show you some. I did a coolest thing ever. So I made open badges. And so here is Computer Architecture for Everybody. This is my website running Sugi. And if you do your assignments and you're good and you get all these scores, eventually you go into this badges page, badges, and it shows you your progress towards your badges. And I got a lot of greens here. And then you can go get your badges awarded and you can look and I awarded 3 badges. Now, to give you a sense of like the stuff that underlies this all, this is JSON for OB2. So it looks like there's some JSON. It's pretty JSON, more JSON. And this JSON has all these URLs throughout it that are hard coded. Okay. So all this JSON is what it takes to construct a badge. And you can copy the badge URL. The interesting thing is the badge URL is a special URL that has to be served a certain way so that you can say, give me the JSON version of this, or give me the image version of this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a pretty complex URL that needs pretty complex software. But the cool part is you can just add this to LinkedIn. Now, this took a lot of time to get to work. So you get this thing where you got this credential and it's got this assertion and got all these things, and then you put it in LinkedIn, and then you end up with a thing. This is my LinkedIn. So if I go back, I can see the organization that gave it to me, which is Learning Experiences, and then show credential will go back to this. Now you don't have to be logged in, but it is the same thing. If I took this URL and I put it into a oops, if I put it into I put it into a anonymous browser, it still works, and that's part of what it means to be a badge. So that's a 1 minute demonstration of badging technology inside Sugi. So I did all this without thinking to myself, is this a good idea or not? Now we have some experience with the open source portfolio, and some of us will have a bit of PTSD that we thought that a portfolio was a good idea inside of a learning management system because so many things feel similar. Well, it went into Sakai in 2016. Blackboard has one built in. Anthology, now Blackboard has two. They bought an external portfolio system and they got a built-in portfolio system. Moodle never had a built-in portfolio system. They have a thing called Mahara. And Canvas has this native portfolio that they're trying to get out of as soon as possible. And they bought a thing called Portfolio. So it's kind of a mess to put something that has a longer life cycle than a course or a semester or even a 4 year degree program into that system that supports those short-term 4 year kind of activities. So I came and I gave a demo to the core team and then the teaching and learning group. And I showed my Sugi badges. And then Wilma, of course, as she's already said, well, if it's so easy, Chuck, why don't you just use AI to put them in Sakai? And I'm like, no, that's a mistake. Oh, just like open source portfolio was a mistake. And so following Earl's open process, we wrote an LTI, a JIRA, right? And so you can say, could you briefly summarize Sakai JIRA 52583? And this is what it said. The primary use case is to enable the building of a full-featured badging system that can plug into Sakai using only LTI, names and roles, and assignments and groups with an extension. And the badging tools needs all the grades to let the admin instructor then decide what achievements warrant and what badges and what course. So I'm like, Sam, why don't you take what I did in Sugi and take my PHP code, feed it to AI, and write it in some other language that's not PHP and do whatever. And so I had this JIRA that gave all the grades to an LTI tool. That got done. And so what happens when you give Sam Ottenhoff working badge code in PHP, a bunch of AI tokens, and ask for an open source online commercial LTI-based badging service that is both hosted commercially and available in Docker? And this is exactly what ChatGPT said. Of course, it knows me only too well. It says you get something dangerously close to an EdTech unicorn. The thing EdTech keeps saying it wants, but somehow never quite builds, an open source badge service with a real hosted commercial option, still runnable in Docker by anyone who wants sovereignty over their data instead of lock-in. So Sam took a couple of weeks with some AI tokens and created a thing called CredTrail, www.credtrail.org. And so that is now time for Sam to take over and show something that's never been built before. Sam built it in a short period of time called CredTrail, which is an LTI tool that pulls data out of Sakai or Canvas and creates badges with URLs that belong to the university in perpetuity, and it's also open source. So Sam, I'm going to stop sharing, and then I will let you take over. And I think I gave you 15 minutes. So
Perfect. So I think, as Chuck set up, there's a confluence of factors. I mean, number one, you have a great spec. And so I think what we're seeing with, a number of different one ed tech specs is, real sort of maturity. So you have a good spec. You have some real sort of examples of sort of UI and flow, and you have some very sort of definitive ideas around, where the badging should live, namely outside of the LMS. So, I guess first question was tech stack. I thought it was pretty easy. TypeScript and Postgres, ability to run in the cloud or ability to run on-prem. So you need Docker. You need lots of tests. You need lots of end-to-end tests. You need to be pretty opinionated when working with AI around a new product. Um, so I think it helped to have a, sort of a very clear idea of tech stack, ability to run on Cloudflare. Chuck emphasized the ability, to host it within your own ecosystem, namely with Docker. And so I think, TypeScript, Postgres, these are sort of rock solid, modern, easy choices. LLMs love to work with it, and pretty easy to test and compile and have this sort of repeatable pattern that you could feed to AI. So um, I can do a quick live demo. So I'm inside of Try Sakai right now as a student. I'm in lessons. These are deep links using LTI. So I can do an intro to Sakai badge as a student. LTI is using a nice TypeScript library called LTI tool that makes setting up new TypeScript tools really easy. And it looks like I've been granted an intro to Sakai badge that I can claim and share within the LTI workflow. So let me try to show the perspective from an instructor. And then I also want to show sort of the rule builder. And so um, I think you can think about different workflows for different institutions. So I think University of Michigan, for example, has a very clear idea that the badge is attached to the institution name, and the institution name has a lot of value, and they probably would want a lot of rules before you can issue an official University of Michigan badge. But there's a lot of workflows. For example, if I am a small organization granting credentials, maybe a small day-long training program, maybe I want to make it a lot easier to grant. So I'm actually logged in here as the instructor. I think it's Wilma of this badges pilot, and I will show you the instructor view. So this is a deep link. So we are pulling the course roster. So this is using NRPS. We pull the roster, we link, we find that this user has already been granted a badge, but I can sort of manually grant a badge to this student based on sort of a demonstration that this student has completed what I expect. And so that is the workflow inside of a deep link. And then we also have an LTI site link placement. And so this would be sort of a more sort of course perspective. We have different badge placements, how many issue credentials, which badges are active in here. And, it's from this workflow that you could create new badges. And so let me just jump over and show a bit of the CredTrail software. And so this is very much a vibe coded product. I would say for those of you interested in vibe coding, I would say, I know it's been talked about a little bit today, but having some very clear opinions about sort of coding and testing and what you want it to look like is pretty important up front. You don't want to come at that, sort of in the middle. And then I think the biggest thing is, having a spec to work on top of. And so it just happens that the specs around badging have become a whole lot more mature in the past couple of years, as Chuck points out. sort of the confluence of the one ed tech plus the W3C coming together on some sort of very clear ideas, which makes it helpful when dealing with AI. AI is able to sort of read specs and understand specs and then, store it as a reference and to keep on coming back to it. But let me just show real briefly. So I'll go to badge program templates. So a badge template would be, intro to Sakai badge or Sakai 1,000+ commits contributor is one template I set up. But what I really want to show off is sort of a rules-based system to sort of you could think about a more complex institution with hierarchies. But here's the basic rule builder. So we have three steps. Number one is the awarding pattern. So we have to choose our template and we can create new templates, and there's a little bit of AI magic in there to help you create images for new templates to create badge images. We have our LMS connection right now is set up against Sakai, but you could be a multi LMS institution. And then awarding pattern is the big one. So, course completed plus a minimum score is probably, if I'm giving you a driver safety certificate, for example, that's sort of the common one. You could also do something like a survey or a prereq. From there, I go on to requirements. And so I have two requirements here. So I want the course to be completed and gradebook items to pass 100%. I could also have, a grade threshold. So if you need a certain minimum score on a certain gradebook item. And then here's our rule of flow preview. Generated JSON, so the ability to sort of override and create super complex workflows is also possible. And then we move on to testing and the ability to look at certain students or to go through certain scenarios to see if they're released. And so you could think again back to sort of University of Michigan as a complex example. You could also think about hierarchies of approval here. So you could think about having a provost or some sort of administrator review the rules, approve it. And so, an institutional badge might have more value and might require, more hierarchy. And then just a quick tour around the system. So we have reporting, claim rate, share rate, views, charts, LMS connections, API keys. So you can imagine sort of bulk issuance, or you can imagine a complex institution that has really complex requirements. For example, you must complete this course in Sakai. You must log into our separate survey system and complete the survey. You must take the AI training that the institution required. And you could think about sort of four systems, and maybe you have a Python script in the middle that pulls information from the four systems every night, and then once all four criteria are meet, you just hit an API endpoint and it dishes out a credential. Final step is public showcase. So just showing some of what Chuck was showing in his system in Sugi. So here's my credential. So it's been issued. Here's the criteria. Here's the governance. I can add it to my LinkedIn profile. I could also add it to my wallet. So wallets are still a growing part of this ecosystem. There's an app if you're interested called LCW. I think it's available on Android and on iOS. So I could add it to my wallet, and I think there's browser wallets also coming pretty soon. And then technical details are hidden down here, but we have the open badges JSON. We could also print a credential if we wanted to. And I'll end with this JSON LD. So this is sort of verbose JSON. So it's kind of like a pretty print JSON with a bunch of extra linked data on top of it. And this is kind of the foundational technology behind badging. So I'll stop there. The software is very much in alpha, but um, it's been exciting to work on. The standards are good, and this seems like finally the time. I know Wilma's been talking about badging for the past decade, and it finally sort of clicked about where it belongs, and the standards finally clicked. And it seems like the ecosystem around it is clicking. And then, of course, it helps that the commercial solutions, want to do things like charge $4 per badge. And so it seems like now is the time for independent open source that you can run on-prem or hosted. But it's an exciting time for badging, finally.
Hey, Sam, show the Git repo because it is open source.
Yep. So github.com, alongside group, and CredTrail app. So it's open source. There's Docker setup. You could use S3. You can use R2, which is the Cloudflare version. But it's a TypeScript app connected to Postgres. Should be, pretty sort of minimum configuration to run against. I put an AGPL license on it, but I'm happy to talk about other licenses if people are interested. I don't have a deep idea about licensing here.
So I think a couple of use cases that have been sort of burning in my mind is, let's just say you're a university and you got Open edX and you got Moodle and you got Sakai and you got Canvas and you got D2L and you
Yep.
want to do badges. Boom. I mean, it's just done, right? Meaning that you might use Open edX for some old stuff and you want to put some badges in that, but you're getting rid of Open edX. Great. Your badges don't go away.
Yeah.
So that's the first use case, is there are a ton of multi-LMS. You know, it,
Yep.
it just is, there's so many different LMSs out there, and this is a badging system that works in all the LMSs. Uh, second second use case observation is one of the things that I've been thinking about for 22 years is what role does commercial hosting and open source play?
Mhm.
And what's clear is if you don't have commercial hosting, you don't have a future.
Right.
And if you only have open source, you don't have a future. And so the idea of this is credtrail.org is a way for someone to just write a check and make some badges. Sam will take your badges.si.umich.edu, you'll CNAME it over to Sam's server, and then
Right.
Sam will host them, but on a domain you own. And if you decide that you just want to download it, you'll grab the Postgres database and image
Yeah.
files from Sam, export Sam's commercial product, stick a Docker inside your Amazon, and fill that Docker with the data. And like change the CNAME from the long site commercial hosted server to your local Docker server. So
Yeah.
part of this also for me is this notion of people love to pay to get started quick, and they're afraid to pay. That's why I don't want to use Credly or I don't want to use Parchment. I'm afraid to pay forever because they hold all my URLs hostage.
That's
So
right.
that's something this does that no other commercial product does.
Yeah, it's also, I think there's also the potential for sort of exports to static. So, for example, let's say you spin up a program at an institution, you issue 1,000 badges, and then the program, shuts down or, stops issuing credentials. But, the ability to have sort of a static perpetual site, with those credentials. I mean, something that, obviously you could never have done with sort of the LMS built in. But I think as Chuck and I talked about this, um, it just became so clear that the LMS was exactly the wrong point for the badge. And the ability to look into the LMS was kind of the key. So we know that, Gradescope and, other LTI apps were, reaching into the LMS looking for all great information, but I think LTI 1.3 and then, Chuck's that JIRA that Chuck referenced were kind of the key breakthroughs there.
Yeah, and so this is a SAM operation with Chuck as inspiration. I'm working this summer to get this adopted as a pilot at the University of Michigan as a paid commercial service. And maybe you will see me on the CredTail site with, startup has like a bunch of faculty members' faces under there that says, "I use CredTrail and it was the best thing ever." Right. And so instead of being a developer, I'm going to be a customer. And with AI, I can ask for something and Sam can get that done pretty fast. So that's what's really kind of cool about when Sam says this is the right moment, right? You can build something that is as complex as what Sam has shown you, and he's only shown you a small part of it, but it came together really fast based on some carefully thought out ideas and a lot of long, painful experience, but it's also agile and can evolve very rapidly. Um, sort of. So I'm really excited about this.
Yeah. And I mean, just one last shout out to sort of the standards that are sort of coalescing now in the 2020s. I know Chuck has probably gone to so many of these IMS Global and One Ed Tech meetings, and if you've ever been sort of dissuaded from it, I think finally QTI, for example, is this robust, cool, just well thought out standard, and we're seeing the same thing with badging. Okay, Wilma can have the screen back.
I think Chuck wanted the screen, right?
Yeah.
You should be
Got
able to
it. That's
share. Yeah.
Chuck. Yeah.
Okay, so there we go. We're back to Sam the unicorn. And by the way, you can ask ChatGPT what the unicorn means. That means it's a rare creature that is beloved. That is an ed tech solution that is open source and yet commercially hosted and agile and quick and transparent. And in a sense, all the good of open source without sort of the heavier baggage that, when you build something 20 years ago, there's a lot of baggage. So that's let's go back to where's my PowerPoint at? Click. There we go. Okay, so we have to end because we're 3 minutes over. Any questions?
No questions? You guys are all in such awe that you can't. Well, I'm really excited about this. I think it's a great product, and I think its time has come. And it is a really nice alternative to a lot of the locked-in, um, commercial-only options that are the only ones out there right now. So I think this is a pretty exciting, departure from that, and hopefully, will be a successful one. So we're looking forward to a nice, pilot maybe with Dr. Chuck and UM, and hopefully it'll gather steam from there. So,
Thanks for
um,
your perseverance, Wilma. I always love seeing JIRAs. Whenever you see a JIRA with like 11,000, SAK 11,000, I know some of our friends in Spain have opened up a couple of those the past couple of weeks. But this feels like something that Wilma talked about more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So
yeah, I have a
um,
conference presentation from 2013 about badges integration with Sakai. So it's
That's
kind of
awesome.
finally here. Yay.
Yeah.
But it's much better now because it's better standard and a better way to approach it. So
yeah, the
it was
world
worth
is
the
different.
wait.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. Really appreciate the presentation, and hopefully there'll be more to come, on Credit Trail in the near future. So now, we've got about a 5 minute break before our, prizes. So I'll give you guys just a second if anybody wants to get up and stretch before, we wrap up the show here.